The first sign came quietly, a system alert I hadn't triggered. My access to the infrastructure dashboard was revoked for exactly 10 seconds, just long enough to raise one eyebrow. I stared at the screen, watching a pulse of red flicker and vanish before I could even exhale. 10 seconds isn't a bug. It's a signal. And signals come with intent. By the time Harold Grant called me into his corner office, I already knew something was shifting beneath my feet. He wore the kind of smile that belonged in stock photos, reassuring from afar, hollow up close. "Marisa," he said brightly, like we were old friends from somewhere we'd never been. "This is Tyler Crane. Just finished his master's at Northwestern. He's going to be shadowing you for a bit. He's the future of infrastructure compliance. The future of compliance." That phrase lingered in the air like perfume, expensive, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. I'd spent 10 years building the protocols that held this company together after the 2014 audit debacle. When I joined Skyridge Logistics, their compliance systems were held together by duct tape and crossed fingers. I wrote the code, built the oversight models, closed the gaps nobody else could even see. Break the system, and the company crumbles. For 10 years, I was the scaffolding holding it all up. Tyler stood next to Harold, sharply dressed, perfectly groomed, brimming with the smug confidence of someone who's never watched anything fall apart. He shook my hand like he was claiming real estate. "I'm excited to learn from you," he said. Eyes too bright, grin too clean. Harold chuckled. "You two will be unstoppable, like a hammer and a nail." Then he winked as if I hadn't just been assigned the role of the nail. I smiled tight and professional, but inside something went still. This wasn't mentorship. This was succession. I'd seen it before. The eager new hire who just wants to learn is always the one they're grooming to replace you. And the boss who calls you irreplaceable is already reassigning your responsibilities without telling you. Still, I nodded, walked Tyler through the surface-level basics, made small talk, pretended I didn't feel betrayal crawling up the back of my neck. But the unease lingered. It followed me back to my workstation like a shadow. That's when I saw it. A shared folder had been accessed, one marked Legacy Investigations 2017, a folder that required senior-level credentials. My credentials. I checked the log. Tyler's name was there. Time-stamped. Logged in. Copying files. This wasn't onboarding. This was reconnaissance. He wasn't learning. He was scanning my playbook. The next day, he leaned over my desk like he'd been there for years. "Marisa," he said casually, "how long would it take to automate this whole process?" I smiled even though my fingers itched. "Forever." He laughed like I'd told a joke. "No, really. Think about it. Let AI handle approvals, real-time compliance, seamless systems. Compliance isn't math," I replied. "It's interpretation, risk, human nuance. You can't automate judgment." He nodded, but the smirk never left. It was the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided you're a relic. I walked him through vendor routing, logic, fraud pattern flags, and exception thresholds. The architecture I'd spent years fine-tuning. He nodded again. Typed fast. Careless. Dangerous. "Wouldn't API hooks speed this up?" he asked. "Real-time decisions." "Speed isn't the goal," I said. "Accuracy is?" Then he said it. "What about removing dual auth on transactions under 10K? We can offset risk with dynamic flags later." My breath caught. Dynamic flags. That phrase was buried in a 2016 protocol I'd buried intentionally. Obsolete. Unlisted. No intern should have known it existed. I turned to look at him. Really looked. He didn't blink. Just kept typing. Behind me, Harold's voice slid in like oil on glass. "How's our rising star doing?" "Eager," I replied. "Good," he said. "Let's not slow down progress." That was it. The message beneath the message. They weren't training Tyler to support me. They were lining up my exit. And what they didn't know was I'd already begun writing their ending. Too measured. "You've got a lot of institutional knowledge, Marisa. Just make sure it's easy for Tyler to follow." Harold's voice was smooth, too smooth. Like a velvet rope hiding a noose. We don't want to slow progress. That last phrase landed like a silent slap, a threat wrapped in business casual. I nodded, kept my face blank steady, but inside something carved a razor line across my patience. Tyler wasn't learning. He was executing. And Harold, he was choreographing the entire play, watching me closely like a gambler, sure his cards were unbeatable. When they finally walked away, I stared at my screen fingers, still resting on the keyboard. Heart steady, but mind sharp. If Tyler used the term dynamic flags, he understood its significance. And if Harold had fed it to him, then this wasn't just recklessness. It was desperation. They weren't just replacing me. They were rewiring everything I built in secret. Not to innovate, to take credit. Quietly, efficiently. Betrayal never slams the door. It whispers. Over porcelain. Over jazz. The restaurant was one of those high-end spots downtown designed more for power than pleasure. Floor-to-ceiling glass, slate gray walls, white linen draped like snow across the tables. A string quartet murmured in the corner. Harold held the door open like a man pretending to be courteous for the cameras. His grin stretched too far, like he was hiding the real punchline. Tyler trailed behind, overdressed, overconfident, undercooked. Then there was Mr. Lin, regional CEO, navy suit, watch like a mortgage. His eyes revealed nothing. He gave me a curt nod when I joined his expression, carved from boardroom marble. The waiter arrived with handcrafted menus I didn't touch. Harold ordered for everyone without asking. Too proud, too certain, like control was on the menu. I sat straight, silent, calm. If this was theater, I wouldn't play the fool. Conversation flowed shallow and saccharine. Markets, efficiency, compliance innovation, buzzwords wrapped in syrup. I let them float by. Then, as I reached for my tea, it came. Spoken just low enough to be missed if you weren't trained to listen. She doesn't know we'll let her go after this lunch. Shame. She looks loyal. My chopsticks froze in midair. For half a second, I forgot how to move. The world didn't collapse. It narrowed down to the weight of steam rising from my cup, the violin's breath, the clink of silver on porcelain. Harold smiled like a man enjoying his own cruelty. Mr. Lin didn't react. Just nodded once. Still unreadable. Tyler grinned oblivious, laughing at something no one had said to him. I set my chopsticks down with care, reached for my tea, took a sip. Because what Harold didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent 5 years in Shanghai, earned my graduate degree at Jiaotong, filed audits for multinational pensions in Mandarin. Fluently, with precision, I understood every syllable. And in that moment, something in me turned cold. Steel dunked in ice. This wasn't just office betrayal. It was confirmation. Proof of what I'd suspected since the day Tyler strolled in like a wolf pup in an intern's skin. I didn't blink. Didn't speak. Just filed the words away like evidence in a sealed dossier. Because language wasn't their weapon. It was mine. They thought it was a wall. They didn't know it was the sharpest knife in the room. Fear yells, strategy, whispers. That night, my silence was deafening. I drove home with the city lights bleeding through the windshield like unsent emails. The words from lunch still sat heavy in my chest, like a stone someone else tried to bury. She doesn't know we'll let her go after this lunch. Shame. She looks loyal. I let the words echo in the quiet. Not as pain, but as ignition. They mistook loyalty for weakness. They were about to learn what it looks like when loyalty breaks. My apartment greeted me like it always did, dim, quiet, unbothered. No music, no TV, just the low hum of my laptop powering on. The glow filled the room like dawn through a sniper scope. I opened a blank folder, titled it Operation Glass Gate, because some walls don't just protect, they reflect. And by the time I was done, they'd see every lie staring back at them. In their own language, and mine. No TV, just the hum of my laptop powering on. The glow washed across my desk like a starting line. I opened a new folder and named it Operation Glass Gate. Because gates don't just lock people out, They open at the right time. They show people what they didn't want to see. By the time I was done, they'd see themselves clearer than they ever wanted. Every lie, every trace, every careless move they thought no one saw. Step 1, take the narrative back. If Harold wanted Tyler to learn the system, then fine. Every file he touched would write a story for me, a story no one could deny. I built a silent listener into the back end of the approval system. No alerts, no flags. Just quiet logging, edits, downloads, view history copied and sent to a secure drive only I could access. Then I expanded the scope. Slack history, sandbox server activity, vendor folders, contract drafts. Everything Tyler touched became a mirror, and every reflection came home to me. As the lines of code streamed across my screen, the resentment I'd swallowed all week transformed into something else, cold, precise, focused. At 11:42 p.m., the first ping came in. Access granted, Legacy and Investigations, 2017 PDF. Tyler again, predictable. 2 minutes later, another alert. Admin override, HG rant. I froze, then leaned forward. Harold hadn't just enabled Tyler. He had manually overridden the access permissions. He'd opened the vault with his own executive key, a direct breach of protocol, one we'd warned about repeatedly in quarterly compliance meetings, one he always claimed to take seriously. Now his name was on the override. A digital fingerprint. He thought he was burying me. What he actually did was sign his name on the shovel. I leaned back slowly, letting the weight of it all settle over me like steel. They weren't mentoring Tyler. They weren't promoting progress. They were dismantling what I built, quietly, illegally. But now I had proof. Time-stamped, traceable, undeniable. At 12:17 a.m., I shut the laptop. The lights of downtown Denver still shimmered beyond the window. I didn't need fireworks. This war would be won in silence. They wanted transparency, I'd give it to them. Just not the version they prepared for. Every downfall begins with a temptation. Mine looked like a legacy file labeled in Mandarin, nestled between 2021 vendor compliance documents. It wore the perfect disguise, old language, old formatting, dull title. Just boring enough to invite curiosity, but technical enough to promise something useful. I didn't email it. I didn't mention it to anyone. I just placed it quietly, like a glass trap beneath still water. The Mandarin was no accident. It meant nothing to someone looking at surface-level details. But inside the spreadsheet were columns of code, thresholds, audit logic, enough real patterns to seem authentic, enough fabricated data to flag misuse instantly. At 11:42 p.m. the next night, the listener reported access. Tyler, again. 2 minutes later, file copied to local machine. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just watched the system do what I designed it to do. Then came the second ping. Admin, override. Again, H grant. Timestamp, 11:43 p.m. Harold had done it again. His override unlocked the file. Tyler copied it, and I had every click, every second. The best part, the system logged it all. Session IDs, device IPs, download durations, digital evidence, immutable, unarguable. I opened the metadata, watched it bloom across the screen like a wireframe of betrayal. They thought I was being quietly replaced, but in trying to erase me, they left their signatures behind. Harold thought he was orchestrating a clean handoff, but all he'd done was walk his golden boy into a legal trap. And I didn't have to raise my voice, because the louder they got, the more visible they became. And I was ready for what came next, grooming his golden boy to dismantle everything I'd built. What Harold didn't realize was that every step he took buried him deeper into a digital archive no one could rewrite. By 12:15 a.m., the auto-forward had done its job. Both access logs, Tyler's midnight activity and Harold's override, had been tucked neatly into Operation Glassgate. Alongside them sat screenshots, timestamps, and metadata trails. Tyler's desktop copy, Harold's override session, a perfect silent ledger of arrogance and hubris. I closed the laptop gently. No adrenaline spike. No smug satisfaction. Just a stillness washing over me, cold-centered. They thought speed was their strength, but they didn't realize patience was mine. I wasn't trying to stop them. I was letting them run, far enough to hang themselves with the same rope they assumed I was too outdated to see. The second Tyler opened that Mandarin bait file, he wasn't learning the system. He was wrapping the noose around his own career. Some mistakes whisper. Others explode in boardrooms. Thursday's compliance meeting began like all the others. Polished slides, pre-scripted applause, the dry hum of fluorescent lights trying to outshine the tension in the room. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, notes aligned, face calm, every gesture calculated. To anyone watching, I looked detached, composed. What they couldn't see was the storm folded beneath my ribs, tight, silent waiting. Harold started the meeting with his usual false enthusiasm. "We've been exploring ways to modernize," he said, gesturing toward Tyler like a proud mentor on career day. "Fresh ideas, smarter systems." Tyler leaned forward, smiling like the room was built to applaud him. "Absolutely," he said. "For example, we've already implemented the FTL thresholds across the last vendor batch. So we're tracking ahead of compliance benchmarks." The phrase hit the room like a dropped spark. FTL thresholds, my term. One I'd invented, and one I'd planted. In a decoy file, a term that never existed in our real framework, a term created only to catch a thief. My spine went cold, but my face didn't change. Across the table, the head of legal blinked, brow arching. "FTL," she asked. Calm voice, but with a sharp hook beneath. "What does that measure exactly?" Tyler hesitated. The smile twitched. He gripped his tablet like it might whisper an answer. Vendor authorization tied to invoice limits," he stammered. Silence. "Legal." Tilted her head slightly. "Interesting," she said slowly, "because I've never seen that term documented anywhere in our compliance schema." Harold jumped in too fast, too loud. "It's part of our new agility initiative," he said quickly. "Forward thinking. It's all about streamlining." He nodded along with his own words like a bobblehead on a sinking boat. Legal's lips curved, not a smile, not agreement. The kind of curve that said, "I smell smoke." Harold didn't notice. He kept talking, stacking buzzwords like sandbags against a rising tide. Words like agility innovation scale. He didn't see the water rising. I stayed still, muscles locked, pulse cool. Because this wasn't arrogance anymore. This was evidence. Proof that Tyler hadn't absorbed anything. He was reciting stolen material. And Harold, he was the one who handed him the script. When the meeting adjourned, Harold clapped Tyler on the shoulder like they'd just pitched to investors instead of tripping a landmine. I collected my notes with slow, measured grace, slipped my pen into the leather case like a knife into its sheath. I didn't have to speak. The trap had already closed. The system was already digesting them. One careless phrase, one planted term. I didn't need to burn them. They'd already lit the match. Desperation has a smell. That morning, it reeked of citrus cologne and panic. Harold cornered me before I'd even reached the bottom of my first cup of coffee. His voice carried that false cheer people use when their world starts to fracture and they're hoping no one notices. "Marissa," he said, leaning on the conference room door like he owned the building. "Got a minute?" I stepped inside. He shut the door carefully, like soft hinges could soften bad news. He smiled too wide, gestured toward the chair across from him. "Just wanted to check in," he said, leaning forward, elbows on knees. "You've been quiet lately?" I met his gaze. Steady, calm, unreadable. Quiet wasn't weakness. Quiet was preparation. Neutral. "Busy," I said simply. "Right." Harold replied just a little too fast. The cadence of a man trying to pretend he still controlled the room. "Listen, Tyler's brilliant, really sharp, but he needs your help. The board's watching these compliance upgrades closely." He hesitated, searching for the right phrase, the kind that sounded like a compliment but landed like a demand. Make it easier for him. Break it down. Speed things up. There it was. Not a request. A command. Dressed up in casual Friday tone and corporate buzzwords. I folded my hands in my lap. Every muscle beneath stillness coiled tight. Of course, I said softly. My voice, silk. My fury, steel. Harold exhaled like he'd won something. Straightened his shirt cuffs, then came the twist of the knife. I knew I could count on you, Marissa. Always a team player. I smiled. No teeth. If he'd looked closely, he might have seen the voltage humming behind my eyes. But Harold wasn't looking for danger. He was looking for obedience, and that's why he didn't see what was coming. By the time I returned to my desk, the damage had already begun. The email was live. Subject Project Equinox Compliance. Reimagined Recipients Executive Leadership. Strategy, leads, legal. I opened it slowly. We're redefining infrastructure compliance for the future. Thanks to Tyler Crane's innovative vision, we're streamlining operations to maximize agility and reduce redundancy. My name appeared once, buried in a footnote. Special thanks to Marissa Dalton for her foundational contributions. Foundational, like the brick wall they plan to demolish and pave over with glass. I stared at the screen, pulse steady, anger locked behind a calm so polished it gleamed. They weren't whispering anymore. They were advertising my erasure, framing betrayal as innovation. But the thing about desperation, it runs, it stumbles, and it bleeds. And Harold had just started sprinting toward his own cliff. I closed the email. The corners of my mouth barely lifted. They wanted speed. I'd show them how fast a career could fall apart. The next email landed like a grenade. Subject line: Vendor reconciliation. Updated. Per Marissa's changes, sender Tyler Crane, CC legal time, stamp 9:31 a.m. I opened the attachment slowly, like peeling back foil on something hissing beneath. Inside, a reconciliation report for a vendor we'd blacklisted last quarter. 3 separate compliance violations, 3 written warnings. Now, approval threshold slashed by 40%. Risk blown wide open. And the note at the top, polite, deadly, implementing Marissa's recent adjustments for expedited routing. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I just stared, breath steady, because I understood what this was. They weren't just replacing me. They were framing me. If this blew up and it would legal, wouldn't start at Tyler. They'd start with the name in the memo. Mine. Tyler wasn't clever enough to stage this. He didn't know the system deeply enough to touch vendor routing logic without tripping alarms, which meant Harold was still calling the plays, just like he always did. I dragged the file into my sandbox and stripped it clean. Metadata doesn't lie. Beneath Tyler's edits sat exactly what I expected. Admin, override, H grant, timestamp, 9:12 a.m. Harold had unlocked the vendor permissions himself. He'd adjusted the risk parameters. And he'd left his digital signature glowing like a neon sign across the log. Tyler followed 12 minutes later. Logged in, implemented the changes Harold approved. It was all there, line for line, byte for byte. I leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Let the rage cool into something sharper. This wasn't panic. Panic is heat. This was precision. Every decision they made tightened the trap they never saw forming beneath their feet. I saved the metadata, compressed it, dropped it into Operation Glassgate, slotting it beside Tyler's late-night access logs and Harold's midnight overrides. Then I screenshotted the email, highlighted the phrase that mattered most per Marissa's recent changes. Because if this file ever triggered an inquiry, if auditors or legal came hunting for answers, I wouldn't need to say a word. The evidence would scream louder than I ever could. Across the aisle, Tyler laughed at something on his phone. Head tilted back like the world owed him nothing but good news. Harold's office door was cracked open. His silhouette pacing behind frosted glass phone pressed tightly to his ear. They thought they were building momentum. They were building a coffin. My inbox pinged again. Another message from Harold. Quick sync later. Want to align on Equinox rollout? Align. The word tasted like smoke. He wasn't inviting me to contribute. He was asking me to bless my own execution. I closed the email, fingers still, mind colder than January wind off the Rockies. They believed they were untouchable, that I'd fold under pressure quietly like a broken piece of furniture someone forgot to thank. They were wrong. They hadn't just crossed a line. They drew a target on my back. Wrong move. In corporate war, you don't shout. You whisper. In the right ears. At the right time. By the time the office emptied, I was still at my desk. The only light was from the twin glow of my monitors. One showed the compliance slide Harold had paraded around that morning like a trophy. The other, a folder labeled Proof. Operation Glass Gate. Open on the screen his override credentials. Tyler's forged edit history and my name planted like a weapon I never touched. It was all there. Not theory, not paranoia. Proof. Public confrontation would only create noise. And noise gets spun, twisted, buried. But precision. Precision collapses empires. So I opened a new message. No subject line. Typed in flawless Mandarin. Mr. Lin, I've identified several procedural adjustments attributed to my office without approval. Please find attached supporting documents for your review. These have not passed formal compliance validation and may present reputational risk if adopted as final. Marissa Dalton. I attached 3 files: Tyler's altered vendor report, his midnight access, and Harold's override entry, evidence sharp enough to cut, but folded in silk. I didn't plead, I didn't accuse. I expressed concern, because in boardrooms, concern echoes louder than outrage. At 10:58 p.m., the reply landed. 1 line, no greeting, no fluff. Understood. Keep documenting. That was all. No comfort. No guarantee. But I understood what it meant. When silence comes from the top, it isn't neglect. It's strategy. I pushed my chair back, exhaled once, then turned to the other half of my plan. Lin could pull a thread, but the real fabric of this company was woven through Tokyo. And the woman holding the loom, Mayu Tanaka, special assistant to the global CEO. More feared than any audit, more effective than 100 HR memos. Because Mayu didn't speak often. But when she did, men like Harold disappeared from org charts by Monday morning. I opened a fresh message. No subject, no signature flourish, just the facts. Attached the full dossier from Operation Glass Gate. Translated twice, once. In business, formal Mandarin, once in clinical Japanese. Precise enough to pass any Tokyo filter. Subject compliance irregularities. Immediate attention. Recommended body. Please review the attached files. Discrepancies between stated policy and actual implementation appear significant. I hit send at 11:42 p.m. The hum of the server sounded like a heartbeat. Then I waited. 5 minutes later, ping, 2 words. Nothing more. I see. Cold, clean, final, and heavier than any threat Harold had ever delivered. I stared at the screen, let the words blur, then smiled the faintest curve, quiet and earned. Because when real power moves, it doesn't shout. It doesn't gesture. It doesn't grandstand. It erases. When power moves in silence, careers don't end in arguments. They vanish. Some endings explode. Mine began with a smile I didn't return. Harold logged into the global Zoom call like a man practicing for a TED Talk. The screen lit up with executives from New York, Shanghai, Tokyo. His hair was perfect, his tie screaming red. Tyler hovered just out of frame. Stiff posture, wide eyes. I sat in the same chair, same desk, same calm. The difference. This time, the spotlight wasn't theirs. It was mine. Tyler's eyes darted like a rookie bracing for impact. Harold smiled into the camera, rehearsed and glossy. "Thank you all for joining," he began. "We're thrilled to share our progress on Project Equinox, a true evolution in infrastructure compliance. Streamlined, scalable, future, ready." He launched the screen share before anyone could breathe. Slides flipping like cards in a magician's hand. Charts, jargon, a bold headline on slide 3, Equinox Flow by Tyler Crane. My name appeared once. Bottom corner, gray font, acknowledgement. Foundational support from Marissa Dalton. Foundational. Like concrete under a building they'd already set fire to. Harold leaned in. Tyler's vision has accelerated our timeline, he said. This is the future of compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, then came a voice. Calm. Even. Precise. Before we proceed, said Mayu Tanaka, I'd like to review a few concerns. The screen shifted. For one long beat, Harold looked confused. Then a folder appeared, bold and white. Operation Glass Gate. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. One click, an access log. Admin override, H-Grant 9:12 a.m. Another click. Tyler's midnight copy of a restricted compliance file. Another, a vendor reconciliation slashed by 40% bearing my name falsely attributed. And then an email screenshot. Harold's words glowing like gasoline. Let's fast-track these changes. Keep Marissa out for now. Tyler went pale. Harold shifted. His smile cracked. These files, they're taken out of context. Mayu's tone sliced through him. Was this context? Another click. The screen filled with Equinox pitch slides. Quotes labeled as mine, now contrasted against my original emails, time-stamped years prior, saying the opposite. Tokyo, New York, Denver. The room stayed silent. Even the bandwidth seemed to hold its breath. Then Mr. Lin spoke. Effective immediately. Harold Grant is placed on administrative leave pending external audit. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Tyler Crane's internship is concluded. My inbox pinged before the call ended. A signed offer from Tokyo HQ, Director of Global Infrastructure Compliance Reporting, directly to Mayu Tanaka. Harold stared at the screen like a man watching his own obituary scroll by. Tyler didn't move. I looked straight into the camera. Face calm, voice low. And in fluent Mandarin, I said, "You thought I didn't understand." I remembered every word. The call ended with a soft click. My reflection lingered on the black screen for a breath, and then gone. Revenge doesn't scream. It speaks, fluently. For years, I believed silence was weakness, that to survive in a cutthroat world, you had to accept, adapt, and keep your head down. But I've learned something else. Silence, when chosen, can be power. Real power doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, it plans, and waits. Then strikes. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not defined by people who fail to see it. It's defined by the work you've done, by the principles you refuse to compromise, and the courage it takes to take your power back when the world decides you've lost it. Every betrayal I faced in this story, a lesson, every door slammed in my face, a blueprint, not to break down, but to build a door they couldn't lock. And when the moment came, I didn't shout, I didn't burn the bridge, I delivered the truth. Precisely, quietly, because truth doesn't need applause. It just needs the right eyes.